Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we discuss the promises and perils of emerging technology and the social, political, and policy landscape in Texas. I'm Zach Whiting, Policy Director and Senior Fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Today, we're honored to be joined by Senator Angela Paxton, who represents District 8 in North Central Texas. She is the chair of the Senate Republican Caucus and the vice chair of the State Affairs Committee. Senator Paxton, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Zach, for having me. It's been something I've been looking forward to for a long time.
Well, we've had a great conversation before the camera was even rolling, so we'll see if we can carry this through. So for a long time, you've been an advocate for the safety, the healthy development, and the flourishing of children. And because it's a tech podcast, you've recently found yourself working more on tech-related legislation. So before we get into some of the specifics and some of the other things we've talked about, from your point of view, what is the intersection between technology and kids' safety and well-being?
Well, there's a lot, and it didn't happen overnight, although in some ways it feels like it has, right? But, one of the things that I think about this moment in history is that the deck is stacked against children like it's really never been before. And sort of by extension, I think that parents really feel that pressure. It is a challenging world to raise children in. And, so I think this intersection of protecting children and how that intersects with technology is something that comes very natural to me because I'm a mom of 4 kids that are now grown. I'm a grandmother of 5, including 2 new little twins that are a month old today.
Yes.
And then, of course, professionally, before I came to the Senate, I was a teacher and taught high school math and physics, and then I became a school counselor. Mm-hmm. So, in the last 25 years, I've seen a lot change. When I started teaching in the early 90s, there wasn't a lot of technology. I mean, I remember we still averaged grades with a calculator, Yep. I wrote myself a program because I majored in math and computer science and everybody wanted my program, right? So anyway, but I remember when we started our family, our son, our first child, our son was born in 93. And while I stepped away from teaching for a period of time, and I went back when our youngest, our 4th one, was in 2nd grade. I went back into teaching. But during that time, the internet came. Yeah. And so when I went back to teaching, it was a whole different world. Yeah. But we still didn't have smartphones. Yeah. We didn't have Facebook. I know as a math teacher, the calculators had changed a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, this isn't a calculator. This looks like a Game Boy, right? Yes. It has this giant screen on it. I had to take a class just how to figure out how to use the calculator.
Yes.
But the effect of technology, technology is a neutral thing in and of itself. It's like a car.
Yep. A tool.
It's a tool.
It's a car, a hammer, all of those things. Yes.
Exactly. And so like any tool or piece of equipment, it's something that can be used for good or for evil.
Yes.
And that's what we see with technology. Yes. And children have always been vulnerable to predators in all kinds of different ways, right? I mean, yes. when I say predator, you can define that in many, many ways.
Yes.
But the world that parents are raising their children in today, I think, is particularly dangerous because of the unseen predators.
Yes.
I don't know any caring parent who would let their child go upstairs into their bedroom and close the door accompanied by a known sexual predator.
Yeah.
And yet parents are allowing that in their own homes without even realizing it today.
Because millions of predators.
Yes. And any device, any device that's connected to the internet, you're 1 or 2 clicks away from pornography.
Yes. One of the things that we've been that we've been thinking about, and it might actually be great to get your perspective as an educator, is so I a few years older than your son. I was born in the late 80s and started going to school in the early 90s, and we had overhead projectors, and people would write on that erasable ink, and I remember when I was in 8th grade, I entered a raffle and I won a TI, so Texas Instruments, shout out to a Texas company.
They're in my district.
Yeah, okay, very good. A TI 86 graphing calculator. And I still have that somewhere saved. So I'm probably a hoarder and need to get rid of stuff. But the technology has changed. And then we've seen, and you've probably seen this, the development from overhead projectors and fancy calculators to now, tablets in every classroom and every student's hands. I have a kindergartner, and I had to fill out some information at the beginning of the year. Are you okay using tablets and all this kind of stuff? Do you have any thoughts as an educator and as a policymaker, but any thoughts on, kind of drilling down more on the role of technology in the classroom? And we've spent, depending on how long we think humans have, been around through, creation or evolution, thousands of years or millions of years, but we've made it thousands of years of educating our children with pens and papers and lectures. There again, it's a tool that can be used for good. Have we reached a point of oversaturation with technologies in the classroom, or are we still kind of figuring that out?
Well, I think we're figuring it out.
Yeah.
And so I think that sometimes there is a rush to be the early adopter. I kind of have the early adopter gene or defect. I don't know which one it is, right? I love new things. I mean, I'm always really interested in new things, new ways of accomplishing things. And again, as a math teacher, I remember the conversations around, when the graphing calculators came out and all that kind of stuff. And, I remember the discussions within my field,
Yes.
right? About, is this a good idea or not? Kids aren't learning their multiplication tables anymore. And it's like, no. And it took a while, though, for people to kind of land in some places that, where we got to a place, I think, of, no, what we need to teach kids how to do these things.
Yes.
But when they get to those higher levels,
Yes.
we can use these tools to do the grunt work.
Yes.
And then that frees up the mind to do the more complex problem solving, right?
Yes.
And that is true.
Yes.
But if you ignore kind of the first part of that, then you don't really know. You have a hard time with a math problem, for example, really knowing if you got the right answer or not, because you don't understand the processes underneath it.
Yes.
So that was a process, right? And I'll give you an example of something that came up in an education hearing just a couple of sessions ago. But we were talking about literacy, making sure that we had kids on level reading, on level math by 3rd grade. That's been a big push, right?
Yeah.
And then we had someone come to testify before the education committee, and one of the things that was brought up is that there appear to be differences in reading comprehension, significant statistical differences in reading comprehension when children are reading on a tablet versus reading on a print book.
Sure.
And I was like, wait a minute, what did you say to the person who was testifying? And I said, please repeat that, because I'm like, how much money has this state, have our school districts invested in technology?
Yep.
And we can't afford to spend those first 3 years doing something that is less effective, no matter what it is.
Yes.
Because enough kids struggle as is. But the last thing we ought to be supporting as a state with our tax dollars,
Yes.
right? And the last thing we owe to families is to be putting in front of them something that doesn't work as well as something else.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that we are learning, and this is just the nature of the beast, I think.
Yes.
You have to stop and ask yourself the critical questions of, does this work? Does this work better than this?
Yep.
And that takes research and that takes time.
Yes.
But I think that in the excitement around, saving time, perhaps,
Yep.
maybe saving money, but are we saving money if we teach a kid, if we don't teach a kid to read?
Yes.
In the long run, that's not going to save us money.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. No, that's fantastic. And there's times where, you go to the store and you're with your kid and they're like, I want that, I want that, I want that. And as a parent, you're like, oh, okay, well, but the one thing I never say no to for our kids is if they want to buy a book. And
Absolutely.
it makes me so happy. And we've bought multiple copies of the same book because, the binding wears out or it gets torn or stuff like that. So no, that's a fantastic point. And I think that's something just to drill down and or to, really set in with the listeners is technology is a tool. Things like graphing calculators and ChatGPT and laptops, they can be a huge value add, but it's those fundamental, those basic things that we have to get down and early. That's a great point.
Zach, sort of related to that, though, are maybe some of these soft skills we refer to, and we talk about them a lot in education. That, a kid has to know how to get along with other kids. A kid whose parents are in the middle of a divorce is going to have a hard time concentrating,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's a kid that's hungry
Yes.
is going to have a hard time learning, right? There are a lot of things that don't sound like learning,
Yeah.
that affect learning.
Yes.
And so I think this is also something we have to think about when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Sherry Turkle. She is an MIT professor. And speaking of early adopters, she has said this about herself, that when technology kind of started springing onto the scene in a massive way about 30 years ago, she has said this, I was an early adopter. I'm like, oh my gosh, these kinds of things are going to free up humanity to do amazing things, sort of like what we talked about with the calculator.
Yes.
Right? That now we can assign the rudimentary number crunching and that version in other kind of disciplines. We can assign that to the mechanical computer, and then we can really focus on the things that frees us up to do
the
analysis
and
the
all that
higher level thinking
Yes.
skills and all of that. And this is going to save people time and energy and let them have more leisure in their life and those sorts of things. And she said it didn't take long for me, though, to start watching as I began studying the intersection and the impact of technology on culture.
Yes.
That we maybe need to tap the brakes because I think there are going to be some unintended consequences.
Yes.
And she tells the story of getting on an elevator. And there was a young mom, and like a 3 or 4 year old child. And the mom was doing what you or I, probably any of your viewers and listeners, do when you have a minute, checking her texts or whatever on her phone. And the little child is holding his mom's leg, and he says, "Mommy, mommy." And she says, "Just a second, baby. Mommy, mommy."
Yep.
Just a second, mom's just checking her text. I'll help you in just a second. "Mommy, look at me in my eyes."
Yeah.
Okay, this is not a mom who's like watching porn on her phone and neglecting her child.
Yeah.
She's doing a very normal activity that none of us, we would call it very neutral, right?
Yes.
But what Sherry Turkle observed about this is something that I can't forget.
Yeah.
She said, as I watched this, all of a sudden, it hit me that what the little boy asked for, eye contact. She said, people don't realize how critical eye contact is
Yeah.
in brain development.
Yes.
So one of the things, if you think about just that one aspect of what technology has altered
Yeah.
in our relationships, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
She wrote a book called The Death of Empathy as well.
Yeah.
And one of her points is just that our engagement with technology has become so oversized,
Yes.
even when we're not doing bad things with our technology.
Yes.
But it comes at the expense of other ways that we are used to use our time.
Yeah.
And one of the most important ones is human interaction. But specifically, when you think about with children,
Yeah.
technology is rewiring all of our brains, but it's not rewiring children's brains. It's wiring it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a whole generation of children who aren't even starting off with a normal and healthy neural infrastructure.
Yeah. Sort of circuitry. I mean, as a dad with 2 young kids, I mean, that story is a punch in the gut. And I've, remember occasions where my daughter in particular, but, she'll come up and, grab my face and, just because she wants to look in the eye. So thank you for sharing that and for the work of Professor Turkle. One of the things also I want to look at kind of bigger picture, and I think it goes to this point that we were just talking about, but there's an entire economy that's built on, hooking our kids on junk food, junk TV, junk social media is my favorite, thing to beat up on. But how are you thinking about these things? And I understand you've started a podcast to think about these things, but as you look at that, what are you seeing and what are you hearing in that space?
Well, one of the things that, I said this a little earlier, children have always been kind of the easy targets, right? And this is not a new thing. But, if you go back into the last century, when I was a kid, I was born in 1963. But, we watched morning cartoons and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember anything scary, subliminal about the cartoons.
Yep.
Okay. But there was a lot of advertising.
Yes.
To children. And Dr. Robert Epstein, who's actually testified before the State Affairs Committee, he's a data scientist and has done a lot of study and research on how big tech companies use their influence to change opinion.
Yeah.
And we don't know.
Yes.
And that's a whole other topic. His work around the construct of ephemeral experiences, which are basically, I think the easiest way for me to think about it is, I remember way back in the day when people started exposing subliminal advertising.
Yeah.
And, advertising is supposed to be about persuasion, right? Like, we're going to convince you that you want this product, right?
Yes.
And we want you to switch from this to this. That's what, advertising is kind of, that's the whole thing, right? Persuading
it's the
people.
model.
But subliminal advertising and these ephemeral experiences, that is not what they are.
Yeah.
They are subconscious.
Yes.
And so they go, you're not being convinced of something, you're being manipulated.
Yes.
Another word for it would be mind control.
Yeah.
And so he's done some really, really important and deep work around exposing how the big tech companies are doing this. When he testified before the State Affairs Committee several months ago, it was actually around the issue of how big tech companies were interfering in election and political opinion swaying, right?
Sure.
But he made a comment. He said, and parents have no idea what their kids are seeing. And I met with him after I actually asked my staff, I said, go intercept him. And as soon as he finished testifying, I went to to visit with him because I was working on what you mentioned. I'm working on a documentary series that will be released as a podcast in the next few months called The Cost of Innocence. And it is about how big tech, big pharma, and big others, and there are a lot of big others, are targeting our kids for profit. Yeah. And advertising is an easy thing to see with this, right? Because when you advertise to a kid, children actually, I believe he said around 70% of adult buying power is actually influenced by children. Yeah. And some of that is, a lot of that is for the children themselves. But you mentioned this, you go to the grocery store.
Yep.
Right? He calls that pester power. Right?
Yeah.
And everyone knows it. Everyone knows it's true. And but just like something, again, this is maybe akin to the lack of eye contact that's happening just because we're on our phones instead of engage because we don't have them with us or something like that, right?
Yes.
That we didn't used to do that. So there's this opportunity cost in our children's brain for that, right? Well, another seemingly harmless sort of thing that happens is in the grocery store with pester power. Down the cereal aisle is a perfect example.
Yes.
And one of the things I'm sure a lot of your viewers and listeners have been paying attention to a lot of the data that has come out around, I guess I would call it big food.
Yeah.
The food pyramid is pretty much now recognized as one of the biggest scams that the government has perpetrated upon the people of the United States. Yes. And this isn't happening everywhere in the world, but it is happening here, and it's been happening for a long time. Yeah. But just one example of that is ultra-processed food. And literally, ultra-processed food meets the same criteria for addictive substance for that category. That's a technical category.
Yes.
As tobacco.
Yes.
What does that mean? It means that it is built to addict us and to addict our children, ultra-processed food, which is, what that means is it is built to cause us to overeat.
Yes.
It is built to cause us to want more.
Yes.
And not be satiated. And so anyone who, and you know what, addiction is a pretty common thing. It shows up in a lot of different ways. Yes. There's screen addiction.
Yes.
There's pornography addiction, there's gambling addiction, there's sex addiction, alcohol addiction. But we also know now that not all addiction is related to substances. There are behavioral addictions, and they
Yes.
look the same in the brain.
Yes. We did our research. We did a kind of comprehensive, kids online safety paper, and there were some, I believe, Dutch researchers, but they talk about biopsychosocial aspects, that it's those three, bio, psycho, and social. Those all feed into the addiction. And two examples, I feel like we're doing a lot of product placement today, but it was a chip company. I don't know if it was Lay's.
Maybe put this down, right?
That's my next one. That's my next target. But it was it was either Lay's or Pringles, and their slogan, I don't know if it still is, but bet you can't eat just one. And
Yes.
they're like throwing it in your face. And the other thing is that I don't drink coffee. My wife and I pretty much prop up the Starbucks right next to our house. But, I watch that. If you want to see addictive behavior, go stand in a drive-through line at a Starbucks, and all the people like in their cars, they can't wait. It's amazing. But it's to that very point. It's an entire economy that's built on that. And it's not, it's not like this, it's, free market magic. You can choose, Lucky Charms s'mores, which we have at our house now. It's a thing. Or you can, choose that. It's the way even that grocery stores are structured, where, it's just boom,
Yeah.
right down the middle.
No, there's a science. There's a
Yes.
science to that. And I remember hearing about that years ago. Just when you go into a department store or something like that, although people don't really do that anymore, they go and shop on Amazon, right? But there is a science to where things are, what's around the periphery,
Yep.
what's right up the middle, what's in the front, what's in the back, right? All of those kinds of things, the loss leaders. There's a whole science to that. And the other thing is, so you think about something like cereal, sugary cereals or whatever, but it doesn't really stop there. It's not just like you're getting your kid a treat,
Yes.
right? What is that doing when they're eating this over and over again?
Yes.
And we know that that diabetes has skyrocketed in the United States.
Yes.
But part of what's so insidious about this is we didn't used to have children with diabetes.
Yes.
And now that's a huge area, and it is not an exaggeration to say it's a huge market.
Yes.
Robert Kennedy Jr. has said there is nothing more profitable than a sick child. I would go farther than that. I would say there's just nothing more profitable than a child, period.
Yes.
But we now have, we're starting to hear recommendations around pushing Ozempic, which is a drug that's supposed to be for people who are morbidly obese and to treat diabetes, pushing it down to children as young as 8. Yeah. And again, going back to the follow the money on all of this, right? So now we've got people addicted to certain kinds of foods.
Yep.
And what does that mean? They keep buying it.
Yep.
Right? And they buy more of it.
Yep.
And they feed it to their children.
Yep.
And then their children are going to follow that same behavior.
Yep.
And now they're sick.
Yep.
And what do we do with sick people? We medicate them. And one of the things I started noticing as I was looking at all of this was, when you get a kid on a medication, actually you get anyone on a medication, right? But when you get a child on a medication, you've got a customer for life.
Yes.
And all medications have side effects. How do we treat those?
Yes.
More medications.
Yes.
Right? And the other thing that I started noticing is just that these medications aren't designed to cure.
Yes.
They're maintenance meds.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's not like an antibiotic or something like that to get you over something.
Yes.
And again, the financial model on that is as overt as it comes.
Yes. Yes. So a lot of times on this podcast, we talk about policy solutions, and I think we'll end up saving that for another time. But you've been a leader in one of the areas I focus on, things like kids' online safety. So you were a champion of HB 1181, which was the age verification bill for pornography. You did a device filtering bill. So maybe we'll talk about policy in another in another episode, hopefully. So, but I think it's been a common thread through this is that there is a role for government to
Absolutely.
look at some of these questions, to engage in those areas, that you've been working on. But I think the common thread through this is, that government can't solve everything. There's, again, a role for it. But as we think bigger picture, and you can take this in any area you want, if you want to go into the tech, specific space, but what can we do to better empower parents and grandparents and teachers and coaches and pastors to, sort of nurture and grow the next generation, whether that's tools for keeping kids safe online or just even having discussions about any of those things that we talked about today. The government can't solve it all. What can we do? Parent to parent, grandparent to grandchild, what can we do?
Yeah. You know what? I was on vacation one time and it was in a gift shop, and there's all the little signs that have funny sayings or tea towels and things like that. Maybe
Yes.
you don't know that. Women, we go into the stores and we see these things. I was in a gift shop one time and I saw this little tea towel and it said, "Move over, coffee. This is a job for alcohol." Okay. So I'm not suggesting alcohol is the solution to this. Very much the opposite. But I think the idea that is being portrayed there is that we need something stronger, right?
Yes.
And I do think when it comes to protecting kids, yes, there is a role for government. We can pass laws that are protective and empowering in nature, that help structure things in our society in a way that is more healthy, right? So we can do that. An individual can't do that.
Yes.
There is, but government is not going to be the answer your kid,
Yeah.
to my grandkids.
Yeah.
There's a role for schools,
Yep.
but they're not the answer, not the big answer. The answer is parents. And so, to that end, one of the things that we started in my office, and I have to give kudos to Julia in my office, who kind of came up with this idea, and I just thought it's fantastic. But we've created on my website, so angelapaxton.com, there is a parent information task force. And the goal for this, we're still building it out, it's still in progress, but the goal for this is to provide parents with tools to help them as they're parenting their children in a digital age.
Yes.
So related to online safety, to privacy, to healthy habits, ideas that they can implement in their own home.
Yes.
And so it's great. And so I would invite your viewers to go to angelapaxton.com and click on the button, join the Parent Information Task Force. And what we'll be doing over time is really kind of creating a collective of parents who can share ideas and who can share with their own networks these ideas and also solicit ideas that families have found effective.
It's one of the things as a parent with two young kids, and this has been the case with parenting, is sometimes you feel like you're alone or I'm the only one. And so to have that community where you can say, oh no, I'm not the only one that's experienced this. I'm not the only one that feels like I don't want my, 8-year-old using Instagram. So that's a great resource. So angelapaxton.com for that. And then the last thing is, so just thank you for your time. And if viewers do want to tune in to your documentary or your podcast, when that comes out, where can they find that?
Yeah, that's going to be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and anywhere that they get their podcasts. They'll be able to find that. Zach, just kind of as a final thought, going at it is a kind of a lonely place right now for parents. I think they do feel isolated. I didn't parent my kids through this kind of stuff because it didn't exist. It was right on the front edge when I was raising my kids, and now they're raising children. So parents today weren't parented through these things, as opposed to something like driving, right?
Yes.
Like when my oldest was approaching the age of getting his driver's license, I thought back to how my dad and mom did that with me, right? And you might go, I'm going to do it just like they did. Or you might go, I am not going to do what they did.
The exact opposite.
Right. Exact the opposite is what I'm going to do. Or somewhere in between. But you had somewhere to start from, not from scratch. And parents, honestly, are having to parent their children through things that they were never parented through themselves. Yes. And many, many parents are struggling with themselves, right? They're struggling with their own things. And the one thing that I would say is that, there are no perfect parents. None of us are perfect. Yeah. The best first step for us with our children is to look at ourselves and get a handle on our own stuff.
Yes.
Right? Get a handle on our own stuff and love our kids enough to talk to them and let them know they can talk to us about anything.
I grew up in a very emotionally repressed Midwestern family, so we didn't talk about stuff, and that's something that I think my wife and I are kind of break the cycle or whatever you want to call it, where
right.
I want my kids to be able to talk to us about anything and not be ashamed and put aside that sort of judgment. Senator Paxton, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all the work that you're doing as a lawmaker, but more importantly, just as a mom, a grandma, and a citizen to help parents kind of navigate this new world. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for letting me be with you today and talk to the folks that you have such an opportunity to make a difference with, and you do that so creatively and with such diligence, and you're a trustworthy source. And I appreciate what you do. And thanks for letting me be part of it today.
Yes, well, happy to. And for those of you watching, we are in a different part of the studio today. This is not the traditional setup that we have. So shout out to our producer Jefferson for doing a great job of kind of reworking things. We got the blue lights in here, so we still have that sort of theme threading through. And one of the other things for viewers that listen to our Right Idea podcast, which is they host in this side of the studio, it is apparently required that you wear a vest when you're recording at the studio. So shout out to Brian and Derek. I'm wearing my vest. I gotcha. So that's all for this week's episode of the Rebel Tech Podcast. I want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us. And in future episodes, we'll dive into more of the policy ideas at the forefront of the 2025 legislative session. We'll see you again soon for another exciting episode of the Rebel Tech Podcast.